Now that we've seen these two-dimensional lists, let's learn about nested for loops, which will be a very common tool that we use when interacting with two-dimensional lists. So now we know how to access a particular student. We just saw this right here would be student seating 0, 0. Actually, I'll just pull this up over here in my code and I'll show you that. So if we want to get this student Anton here, we would do seating 0, which gives me this item in our list. In the outside list, right? The 0th item is itself a list, which is the first row in the class. And then we will index and get the first person in that row who is index 0. Anton. All right. Then if I do 0, 1, think about what this would give me. Who would be 0, 1 here? When I run this, we'll get Jordan, because this is still getting the 0th row. So the 0th item in my seating list, which itself is another list. And then in that list, it'll get index 1, which is Jordan. So we're comfortable with that. But what if we wanted to iterate over all of the seats? How would we do that? Normally we use a for loop for one-dimensional lists. And because for loops are the tool that we use for iterating, I think that's still a great idea here. But we won't be able to use it just the simple way that we're used to. So to motivate this a little bit more clearly, this is the output that I want. I want to list out all of the names here: Anton, Jordan, Joy, Ibrahim, Sam, Pooja, Koro, Nathan, and Mira. Let's think about what we actually need to do. So for each row in the class, we want to, for each name in that row, print it to the screen. This is kind of interesting because this is the first time we're seeing one for each and another for each together in the same sentence, in the same structure. This isn't the sort of case where, okay, for each student print their name and then for each student print their age. This is saying for each row, which makes me think a for loop that'll get me rows. And then for each of the rows, we want to do some sort of looping inside of that. So for each name in that row, print it to the screen. What does this look like in code? Okay, well, let's do the outside first, the first thing. So we want to get each row. The way we do that in a list is we can either do for row in the name of the list, or I'm going to do this kind of matching the format that we've seen of indexing with kind of these two braces like this. I'll just get the range here. So for row in range 3, the reason I picked 3 here is because if we look back at our seating chart, we have 3 rows here. So we have index 0, 1, and 2 for the rows. So okay, this loop will give me iterate 3 times, and row will the first time be 0, second time be 1, and the third time be 2. And we know how to get an item out of our seating list. We could do seating row. So seating open bracket row. Let me print this along as we go. For row in range 3, we can print seating row. And this should print each row on its own line. Nice. So we have that. Anton, Jordan, Joe, Ibrahim, Sam, Pooja, Koro, Nathan, Mira. Okay, but now the second half is for each name in that row, we want to print it to the screen. So let's say we had one particular row. We had the seating row. This gives us a list. Now for each item in that list, we want to do something, which makes me think another for loop. That's exactly what we actually want here. For column in range 3, print seats row column. Because we're going to do for call in range 3. And why 3 again, by the way? Because we have 3 columns here. The length of each list is 3. And then we'll print, we get the row first, seating row. And then in that row, we're going to go through and print each student in that row. So we'll index to the column. Now, when I run my code, prints the names Anton, Jordan, Joy, in order, right? From left to right. Anton, Jordan, Joy. Then we're done with the first row. Then Ibrahim, Sam, Pooja. Then we're done with the second row. And then Okoro, Nathan, Mira. And we're done with the third row. This is handy to see in Python Tutor. And so I'm going to pull it up so we can step through and see what happens line by line. So here, as we step through, first we are creating our lists. And let's just see how Python Tutor represents this, by the way. So seeding is a list. And by the way, remember how lists are over here, they're on the right. They're not in the frame because they're this big complicated thing. It's mutable, kind of goes over here on the right. And before we would have 3 boxes labeled 0, 1, 2 with the value that's in each box. But here, actually, inside of each box, we have another list. We have another list. So what this means is that each box actually points to another list that is its own object here on the right. So seeding is a list that has 3 items in it, and each item is itself a pointer to a list, another list. Now, as we go through, the outer loop first sets row to be 0. And now with row equal to 0, we go through the columns in that row. So first we get column 0, you can see right here. And this prints Anton, great. Then we increment column by 1, and we get row 0, column 1, Jordan. And then we increment by 1 again, because that's the last entry in our range. And we get 0, 2, and we print that out right here. Print seeding 0, 2, and that prints Joy. So now at this point, we're done with the inner loop. And so what happens? Well, the body of the outer loop, and by the way, I'll point out here, I'm using these words, inner and outer. The inner loop is what we call the thing that's most indented here. The outer loop is what we call that's the thing that's here on the outside. So our outer loop here is made up of a body, and this body happens to be another for loop. The body can be anything. So this happens to be another for loop, which itself has a body. And so when this body is done executing, meaning this inner for loop is complete, then the outer for loop goes on to the next value in the range. So the first value is 0. The next value for the row is 1. So as I hit next here, we'll see that Python goes to evaluate line 6 because we were done with the body. Line 7 and 8 are done running. And now you see row goes up to 1. And the same thing will repeat here. So now column starts off as 0. Whoops. I see. It's accidentally skipping here. There we go. So row starts off as 1. Now column starts off as 0. You can see that over here on the right. And then we print Ibrahim, Sam, Pooja, as column keeps going up by 1 and row stays to be 1. And now finally we do the same thing with row equal to 2. And we see column 0, column 1, column 2, and we get the output as we expected. I'll put this out one other way because this might be a new thing to get your mind, to wrap your mind around. The other way to look at this is think about how you would go about printing these in order. So this first person is what index? They are index 0, 0. So seeding 0, 0. The second person here is 0, 1. The third person here is 0, 2. Keep an eye out. Notice if you see anything interesting in this. As I keep going here, okay, the next row becomes 1, 0, 1, 1, and 1, 2. Finally, the last row is 2, 0, 2, 1, 2, 2. Look at this pattern. Notice what's happening here. We have 2 numbers always, because we're kind of in a grid. The outer number just keeps going up, 0, 1, 2, 0, 1, 2, 0, 1, 2, which looks a lot like a range. A range from 0 to 3. 3 not inclusive, so 0, 1, 2. So this is like the, and then this other number is matched up with the row. So we have 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 1, 2, 2, 2. And so the way we would generate this is by having this for loop. This outer for loop handles the first number here. So for each row index, of 0, we want to iterate through 0, 1, 2. So we get 0, 0, 0, 1, 0, 2. Okay, then for row 1, we need to get 1, 0, 1, 1, 1, 2. Okay, then for row 2, we need to get 2, 0, 2, 1, 2, 2. And so that's exactly what happens in our code here. The outer loop handles changing that first number. So for row in range 3, so 0, 1, 2. And then the inner loop says, per each number of the outer loop, I'm going to generate my own numbers. And I keep this outer number constant because this is this inner loop is part of the body of this outer loop. I will just briefly here play a little bit more with this in Replit. So I could do for I in range 3, j in range 5, for example. I'm just picking some random numbers here. Print I comma j. This is how we get this sort of pattern of 0, 0, 0, 1, 0, 2, 0, 3, 0, 4. I just want to keep reiterating this idea of these two lines are part of the body, or make up the entire body of the outer loop. So what happens is I get set to 0. In fact, let me even print this a little bit more clearly. I colon plus stir I plus j colon plus stir j. And yeah, so we see I gets held at 0 as j keeps going up by 1 because I is set to 0 and then the body gets executed, which itself is a for loop that keeps repeating and going j is 0, j is 1, j is 2, j is 3, j is 4. All of that happens while I is 0. Only when the inner loop finishes does the outer loop go on to the next number in the range. So then I becomes 1, and the body is executed, which itself is a loop that has j go from 0 to 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. And that's why we see, okay, I1, 0, I1, J1, I1, J2, I1, J3, I1, J4, so on and so forth.